Well, blaming the Russians is not a uniquely American phenomenon. Brexit is now being pinned on Russian interference. Here is the Member of Parliament from the Labour Party, Ben Bradshaw, the leading campaigner for Britain's Remain group, explaining his views. Watch.
When will we realise that Russia's strategy is to weaken and divide the free world, and that driving the biggest refugee flows into Europe since World War II is a deliberate part of that plan? And when will we admit that what Putin can't achieve militarily, he is already achieving using cyber and propaganda warfare? I don't think we have even begun to wake up to what Russia is doing when it comes to cyber warfare. Not only their interference, now proven in the American presidential campaign, probably in our own referendum last year. We don't have the evidence for that yet, but I think it's highly probable.
Joining us now is Nigel Farage. He's the European Parliament member who spearheaded the Brexit movement. Mr. Farage, thanks for joining us tonight. So do you believe that Mr. Bradshaw has evidence to back up his assertion that the Putin government was likely behind Brexit?
I think it's the most hysterical thing I've yet seen. I mean, ever since June 23rd, when we voted for Brexit, there have been all sorts of excuses that have been rolled out. But now to blame it on Russian cyber hacking, I think they've reached a new low. I mean, look, we're seeing this concerted campaign here in the States to try and sort of say, well, Trump wouldn't have won unless Putin had intervened. Frankly, 2016 has been a year of political revolution. The people have spoken. Yes. There's been massive change. And what we're seeing from the establishment and their friends in the liberal media, frankly, they can't accept the result. They're doing everything they can to try to overturn it. Well, do you know what? It isn't going to happen.
So it seems to me this is a manifestation of an anti-democratic, small d democratic impulse where the people in charge are not interested in hearing from voters, and so they are making excuses for what is obviously, voter desire as expressed at the ballot box and blaming someone else, like the Russians.
Well, the people, those in charge think they are cleverer, better educated, more worldly. They can do a far better job directing our future than we, the peasants, possibly ever could. It's based on this incredible arrogance. And if you look at the way the European project was set up, it was designed so that voters couldn't really change things. And how interesting that Hillary Clinton had seen the European Union as a model for a much bigger form of global common market. So, goodness, isn't it just right that Trump followed on from Brexit? And what we're saying is we want nation-state democracy. What we're saying is actually we don't want to be talked down to or sneered to by bureaucratic, liberal, global media elites. We will make our own minds up on our own future, and you can try as hard as you want to say that it's all some, cooked up conspiracy by Putin. Nobody believes it. They just look like bad losers.
Well, one common thread between the European elites and the American elites is they never blame themselves. So you saw in Mr. Bradshaw's comments, he's blaming the Putin government for the massive refugee flows into Europe. My understanding was that Angela Merkel of Germany kind of opened the door, and that's the key fact.
No, she did. In fact, what Chancellor Merkel said in July 15 was, as many people as come, we can cope with them. And, of course, what it meant is that 80% of people who came would never have qualified for refugee status under any formula. They were mostly young males in their late 20s, using this opportunity to come from all over the world. And what we know is not a single one of them had been vetted in any way to see whether they were linked to ISIS or not. So literally what Merkel did was to import terrorism into the European continent.
So it's a total disaster that will transform Europe forever, and the elites in Europe are blaming not themselves but Russia, not surprising. So what's the next stage of this? So in the U.S. and in Europe, the people in charge have been repudiated but refused to learn a lesson from it. What happens next?
Well, I have a big warning here, because I was in the European Parliament yesterday morning in Strasbourg, debating with Mr. Juncker, who is the president of the European Commission, the most powerful bureaucrat in the whole of Europe. And he now wants to push full on for a European army, a militarized European Union, one that effectively wants to get rid of NATO, using the excuse that Trump has been elected. We must now do this on our own. And in tandem with militarizing a continued push to the east. And by that, what was said yesterday morning is visa-free travel should come in quickly for the Ukraine and Georgia. The association agreement with the Ukraine, which means it's effectively step one of the Ukraine becoming members of this political union. That's the push ahead too. And I really worry. I worry that we're going to see a European Union, wounded animal though it is, dying though it is, but before we get to that point, it's going to provoke some kind of conflict with Putin. And I would say to that British MP who was looking to blame all of our woes on Putin, whether you like Putin, whether you choose to live in Russia or not, why on earth would you provoke Russia? Why on earth would you push a stick, into that Russian bear? Because if you do, they're going to respond. And that's why I really hope that President Trump can change things fundamentally. Let's at least start talking to Russia. But let's be aware. But let's be aware that NATO is now directly under threat, not from Donald Trump, but from Juncker and the European Union, who want their own army.
Exactly. And the left in Europe has so much in common with the left here. They do want conflict with Russia. That's obvious. It's becoming clearer in the United States. Why is that? What's the impulse behind that? What about Russia enrages them in a way that, say, North Korea and Iran do not?
Well, they have to have an enemy, don't they? And what Putin represents, of course, for all his faults, but he represents a strong leader who believes in his own nation. They call it nationalism, nationism. They talk about these things in pejorative terms. Of course, Putin doesn't like the European project, because the European project wants to make Ukraine, his next-door neighbour, a member of an alternative political and military alliance. Come on, you can't blame him for that. But no, I think all through history, you see that empires that are built, that are struggling, that are failing, they have to have an enemy. They have to have a hate figure, and it's Putin.
And it can lead to very reckless and destructive behavior, unfortunately. Nigel Farage.
I think that's right. And I think that unless we stop this European army, we could be headed for very real trouble.
Well, their first project would be to put down rebellions like Brexit, I'm afraid.
Well,
thanks for joining.
Well, they can try. They can try, but they won't do it, I promise you.
Well, God bless. Thanks a lot. So are Russian saboteurs lurking among us, subverting democracy? Possibly. We'll ask Dr. Sebastian Gorka. He's got the final word on that. Stay tuned.